morning. Thank you for welcoming me, and I thank you all for giving me this opportunity, and I hope you will listen to me. Let me just give a little background. I graduated from Southwestern University School of Law. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years and also a member of the Arizona State Bar. I primarily did insurance defense and major product liability, government tort. I also was in the U.S. Air Force, security police, law enforcement specialist. I had a 14-month overseas Southeast Asia tour in Vietnam and Thailand. I've also been a deputy city attorney for the city of Hawthorne at the LAX courthouse and prosecuted misdemeanors there. I've had over 25 trials, maybe over 40 arbitrations. I filed bar complaints. I filed complaints with the Commission on Judicial Performance. I wasn't out to get anybody, but I was raised to leave things at least as good as you left them, if not make them better. These matters for the complaints happened on my watch. They were serious matters, and I had the evidence. I'll get into that a little later. I've written several items on legal reform. That's what I eventually got into. After insurance defense, I got into plaintiff's legal malpractice. That's when I got my real legal education. And that's when I also got my head handed to me. I filed a bar complaint that I'll get into. In fact, I was here 20 years ago for this annual meeting in the old Transamerica building. And the bar should be ashamed of itself. The whole legal profession should be ashamed of itself, what happened in that case. And I'll get into that in a minute. I then got into legal reform. And I'm simply amazed. I mean, I love the law. I find it very challenging, but it's exponentially outweighed by the frustration. I'd like to thank you for being here, but I'd also like to thank the people of the public for being here. Particularly Mr. Forte. I've known him for about 20 years. I can verify everything he said, and I'll add a little myself later. I'd also like to thank Ms. Lee and Ms. Davis here, because if you go back to a final report by the Discipline Monitor in 1991, Professor Robert Felmuth, listening to them, it reminds me what he said, and he concluded his report. He got permission to listen to the State Bar hotline. It was confidential. And he said he was brought to tears listening to people call in. Simple citizens that give an attorney money, and then they call up and say, did I do something wrong? I gave the attorney $5,000. He won't return my phone calls. He won't answer my letters. And in his final report, Professor Robert Felmuth said that the level of dishonesty is simply embarrassing regarding attorneys. And the bar doesn't do much about it, and neither do the judges, because through my experience, perjury is rampant in our courts. And it's not only California, this is across the nation. Currently, we have an attorney general who's in dual contempt of Congress, and nobody does anything about it. A man that filed a false affidavit going after newspaper reporters, the First Amendment, and nobody does anything about it. Then I also thank Ms. Levinson. She's left. She brought up a very important thing about Brady violations. And you see how bad the problem is there in criminal cases when people's rights are at the highest level. Just think what these people have to go through. Mr. Forte is in the criminal system, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these people, what do they have to protect them? If Brady violations aren't protected, what does the ordinary person have? And what's so amazing is when I started this quest in legal reform, I wasn't looking for it. We're right back at the same time. This is the same place. Every 5 years, you see this in the state bar. We got to reform it. Nothing really happens. It only gets worse. Currently, there's a 9/8/14 article by Timothy Nagel. The State Bar of California is lawless and a travesty and should be abolished. 11-14-14 at State Bar, Drama and Dysfunction Are Never Out of Style by Cheryl Miller. 12-8-14, Big Changes Are Needed in California State Bar, Dan Walters, Sacramento Bee. Currently there's a book out, 2014, License to Lie, Exposing Corruption in the Department of Justice by Sidney Powell, a 10-year former prosecutor there in the Justice Department. And Judicial Deceit, Tyranny and Unnecessary Secrecy at the Michigan Supreme Court, the 2013 book by Chief Justice Elizabeth A. Weaver. She's a former Chief and Associate Justice on the Michigan Supreme Court. Now, I don't want to go back into my
Yes,
thing.
I just want to emphasize, if you might, California, we don't have jurisdiction over the Michigan Supreme Court, or I believe Attorney General Eric Holder, who I don't believe is a member of the State Bar.
Sure.
So our jurisdiction is limited to attorneys and matters
Okay, I'll go there.
licensed in California.
The only reason I did that is to show you how systemic and wide and deep the problem
But
is.
you do have limited time, so I'm just trying to focus you on the matters that we can assist you with.
Well, how I get into the legal reform is because I had a legal malpractice case with some clients that were horribly burned. It turned out to be a third-generation legal malpractice case. And the first two cases were irregular proceedings. Attorneys ignored a conflict of interest. When I brought it to trial, the judge ordered me to sit down in my opening statement. They made no effort to limit or terminate the complaint. About the third day through trial, we come back from lunch, and the judge says, while I'm questioning a witness, I'm in the middle, getting ready to resume, he said, "This case is over. No attorney would bring this case. Jurors go into the jury room and fine for the defendant." He did it sui sponte. I objected, of course, and I had two highly qualified expert witnesses that supported our theory of the case at every turn. One, a lawyer that had over 200 trials to verdict. The other, a former state bar prosecutor. And they said these attorneys had violated a conflict of interest, committed fraud on the clients, and it caused them to lose a $2 million offer in the first case and a $550,000 offer in the second case, because the second attorney represented the same conflict. And in fact, even took over the appeal of case one, which was another conflict. I was threatened with $165,000 in sanctions. At the time I was married, my wife was down at the trial. She almost had a heart attack. Now, I went to the bar. In fact, in 1988, there was an article in the California Lawyer said, if you're filing a legal malpractice case, file a bar complaint. The bar will resolve it quickly. If it's in your favor, negligence per se. The bar waited years and years and years protecting these attorneys because they were both past presidents of the California Trial Lawyers Association. In fact, one of Stephen Brill's magazine, American Lawyer, the guy who founded Court TV and then later wrote Brill's Contact, did an article on the first case and said worst performance of the year. And these two attorneys were R. Brown Green and Melvin Belli. Now what's so awful is, you said bring it back to California. I filed a verified accusation. That's the final step in a bar complaint. The bar did nothing. In fact, the grievance, his case in Merced County, and he's also gone to federal authorities, they've thrown away his police brutality complaints. It's a litany of dereliction, deceit, duplicity, dysfunction to the point it's deceit. And what's happened is the rule of law went to die in Merced County. You need to look at his complaint. I can vouch and verify for everything he says. His own attorney sold him down the river. Now I'll just read this. I'll wrap up here. And here's an email I sent him. Your 9/25/12 conversation with ED, that was his attorney, the acting public defender, who later they rewarded him to become the public defender for Merced County, who later attempted suicide. One of the most important points was his statement that he advised you he was going to make a motion to dismiss your complaint, not on the ground of the prosecution's admissions of having major conflicts of interest or the ground of egregious prosecutorial and other government bad actors' misconduct, but on the ground that you are mentally incompetent to aid in your defense. ED jumped the gun at the 9/27/12 hearing when he stated, at this time, he's talking to the court, I'm asking the court to make a finding. Well, I'm asking the court to accept the declarations that Mr. Forte is not presently able to assist counsel at this time. Further, as discussed, no papers or declarations were filed with the court at, before, or subsequent to that hearing. Not a single fact was presented at that purported hearing, and the judge failed to even inquire, much less demand such, which the procedure law requires, but instead states, when ED was finished speaking, very well. Clearly, it appears from the transcript of that hearing alone that DA, LM, ADAT, and your attorney, APD, ED, and Judge Cadle all have been having ex parte communications and have agreed on a plan of how to dispose of the cases against you in their predicament, all having ignored their oaths of office and commensurate duties, the law and your rights, and acting in concert to do such.